How's it going, my bakers? Hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're making a cold-proofed 100% hydration, 100% whole wheat bread. So let's go to the kitchen and get started. This is my third 100% hydration recipe. The first one was made with white flour. The second one was whole wheat, but they were both fermented at room temperature. Lately, I've been really into cold fermentation, so I thought, why not make a cold-proof version? Cold proofing is the best method for your breakfast bakes. You make the dough the night before, you let it rise, you divide it, you shape it, you pop it in the fridge, and on the next morning, all you need to do is bake it. It is easy, convenient, and produces a super tasty loaf of bread. And that is exactly what we're going to do today. So let's get right to it and see what we need to make this. For the ingredients, we'll need some whole wheat bread flour, some yeast, some salt, some olive oil, and some water. And of course, since this is a 100% hydration dough, we need equal amounts of flour and water. You know this thing will be wet and sticky, but it'll be quite easy to handle. As for the equipment, we'll need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, temperature probe, and ideally a square, deep baking tin for fermentation. It will allow us to keep the dough in a certain shape, and the high sides will prevent the cling film from sticking to the dough. But you can certainly ferment it in a bowl. But having a tray like this will make your life easier. We'll also need to be a little bit creative when it comes to final proofing. Use the largest tray you have and line it with non-stick paper. These loaves will be very sticky, so covering them with some parchment paper and perhaps some cling film might be a good idea. I would not suggest using a cloth, because that might be too heavy. I think the best idea would be to cover the tray with another tray. That is, of course, if you have a tray that fits well. Luckily for me, I do. But those are your options. Use what you have. Okay, let's begin. First things first, temperature control. My kitchen is quite cool, at around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 Fahrenheit. And since this is a no-knead dough, we want to use slightly warmer water. Usually, this will be way too warm. But when making a dough like this in a cool kitchen, this is just about right. Okay, so to make the dough, in a large bowl, combine the water, the yeast and the salt. Give it all a good mix. You want to dissolve the salt completely and hydrate the yeast. Since we are not kneading this dough, this is our only chance to dissolve the salt. So make sure you mix it well. Mix a bit, and then, if you think you're finished, mix some more. Once you don't feel the salt scraping against the bottom of the bowl anymore, add the whole wheat flour. And again, we need to mix well. Mix first until there's no more dry flour left, and then continue vigorously mixing for another 30 seconds or so. That's the dough done. Looks more like a batter, but trust me, it'll make some nice breads in the end. Okay, grab your fermentation tray and pour the olive oil into it. It'll prevent the dough from sticking to it too much, and by the time we finish the folding steps, it will all be absorbed by the dough, making it just slightly richer. Okay, now pour the loose dough into the tray and then take its temperature. Around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit is what we're after. And mine was just a hair off, but it's not a big deal. If your dough is a few degrees warmer or cooler, you should adjust the fermentation times accordingly. Okay, let's cover this up and leave it to ferment for 30 minutes. In a no-knead recipe, gluten is developed by folding instead of kneading. And so we must perform the first fold, which is called a bowl fold. Wet your hand with water so it doesn't stick, grab the dough by one side and fold it over itself. Keep repeating the same step as you go around in a circle. And you want to keep going around for around 3 times or so. The dough will become more manageable, but don't expect it to be very tight at this point yet. Once you have finished folding, flip it with the seam side down, then cover it and leave it to ferment for another 30 minutes. Now we'll perform the first coil fold. The purpose of the bowl fold was just to get the dough started. It is the coil folds that will be responsible for most gluten development. Once again, wet your hands with water, release the dough from the tray, then pick it up by the middle, let it hang down and roll it underneath itself. Roll it a couple times, then turn the dough and repeat the same steps. This method is perfect for high hydration dough. And if you are not so familiar with folding, you can find a full video about it in the Steps of Baking playlist. Okay, after the first coil fold, cover your dough up again and leave it to ferment for another 30 minutes. Now we'll perform the second coil fold. This time let's look at it from the side. This fold is performed the same way as the previous one. Pick the dough up by the middle, let it dangle down and then roll it underneath itself. If it doesn't stretch out by itself, you can shake it around a bit. This is a small piece of dough, so it doesn't take much folding to get it tight. But also because it's small and light, it doesn't really hang down that much. It is easier to perform the coil fold on a heavier, larger piece of dough. Okay, after the second fold, cover it up again, leave it to ferment for another 30 minutes. Now we can perform the third and final fold, and of course it's performed the same way as earlier. Cover your dough up once again, leave it to ferment for 30 more minutes. And this marks the end of bulk fermentation. Our dough is ready to be divided. It's already full of gas, it's nice and wobbly, there's enough gluten strength. It is very sticky, so coat it in a thick layer of flour. To avoid making a mess on your table, divide the dough on a tray and dust that tray with flour too. It may seem like it's too much, but trust me, you need it. Okay, now, without hesitation, turn the dough upside down in one move and let it fall out on the floured surface. It should come out pretty easily. And I'm sure you guessed it, we must dust it with more flour. Make sure that every bit of exposed dough is covered in it. You can even gently spread it around with your hand. Now you can choose how many rolls you want to make. This recipe makes 2 large rolls, like the ones I showed you at the beginning of the video, or you could cut the dough into 4 smaller ones. If you're gonna make 2, they are gonna be pretty big. Definitely too big for one sandwich. I'll leave those decisions up to you. Once you have cut the dough, separate it a little bit so it doesn't spread out and stick together again. And dust the exposed cuts with flour. And that is it. These bad boys are ready for final proofing. And of course, if you want to bake these on the same day, you just leave them out at room temperature for another hour to an hour and a half. But if you are proofing them in the fridge, you'll leave them in there for around 12 hours or up to 24 even. Use the largest tray that will fit inside your oven and in your fridge. And make sure you leave a good gap between the rolls. Okay, now we need to cover them. And as I mentioned earlier, you could use some parchment paper and then perhaps cover them with some cling film. Cling film alone may be too sticky, and a cloth will definitely be too heavy and also stick to the rolls. All that flour you see on the surface now won't be there tomorrow. So ideally, cover your rolls with another tray. Okay, let's pop these things in the fridge. I left mine in there for 12 hours. On the next day, make sure you preheat your oven 230 degrees Celsius, fan off, and that's 446 degrees Fahrenheit. And just look at these things, they are huge. You can bake them just like this if you want, but I like to make them look a little bit more rustic, so I gave them a good dusting of flour. I guess you could also use some wheat bran, or even some seeds. This dough is pretty sticky. Okay, now these bad boys are ready for the oven, so let's pop them in there. They'll take around 20 minutes. Once they are nicely browned all over, they are ready. I'm placing the baking tray on my pizza steel, which is also preheated. If you have one of those, then use it. It helps to cook the bottom of the bread a bit better. If you don't have a steel or a stone, then check the bottoms after 20 minutes of baking, and if they are not quite done yet, flip the loaves upside down and pop them back in the oven for another 2 or 3 minutes. But there you have it. That is how you make a 100% hydration, 100% whole wheat breakfast bread. It is extremely light and airy and soft. There's a very tender and moist crumb, and the flavor that the cold fermentation brings is on another level. When it comes to bread like this, you want to consume it while it's still fresh. Flatbreads stale very quickly, so ideally you want to bake it and eat it within a couple of hours. I do hope you try it out because it's well worth the effort. So what do you think of this recipe? What's the highest hydration bread you've ever made? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.